Welcome to the world of daily life stories. Don't forget to like and subscribe so you don't miss new stories. Enjoy listening. A young dreamer takes flight. 9-year-old Micah Johnson sat cross-legged on the plush rug of his small bedroom. Sunlight poured in through the window, reflecting off an intricate display of model airplanes arranged on a shelf against the wall. Each model held a special story, but one stood out, a sleek white jet with crimson stripes. It was a perfect replica of the aircraft his father piloted for a major airline, and it was Micah's most treasured possession. Today was no ordinary day. Micah's excitement was barely contained as he carefully wrapped the model in soft tissue paper before placing it in his backpack. His father, Captain Noah Johnson, had promised him a rare treat, a chance to fly as an unaccompanied minor on one of his flights, bound for Miami to visit his Aunt Lila. "Ready for your big day, Ace?" Captain Johnson's deep voice resonated from the doorway. Dressed in his pristine pilot's uniform, complete with golden epaulets on his shoulders, Noah looked every bit the figure of authority and pride. Micah turned and grinned, his eyes sparkling with anticipation. "Ready, Dad. I even packed my lucky plane." Noah stepped into the room, crouching to Micah's level. "Good. A true pilot never forgets their lucky charm," he said with a wink. He gently ruffled Micah's hair before standing. "Come on, co-pilot. Let's get moving." The drive to the airport was a mix of animated chatter and shared memories. Noah recounted tales of his first flights and the challenges he had overcome as one of the few black captains in the airline industry. He spoke about perseverance, determination, and the importance of treating everyone with respect. As they approached the sprawling airport, Micah's eyes widened at the sight of planes lined up on the tarmac. "Each one of those planes carries hundreds of dreams," Noah said, glancing at his son in the rearview mirror. Micah nodded, clutching his backpack tighter. "And one day, I'll be the one flying them." The airport buzz. Inside the terminal, the buzz of activity was almost overwhelming. Travelers hurried in every direction, some pulling wheeled suitcases, while others carried backpacks or cradled coffee cups. The polished floors gleamed under bright lights, and the occasional chime of announcements punctuated the background noise. Noah led Micah through the crowd, nodding and exchanging greetings with airport staff. "Morning, Captain," a security officer called, saluting Noah. Micah walked close to his father, pride swelling in his chest. Every time someone addressed his dad as captain, Micah felt a thrill. His father was a respected leader, and Micah wanted to follow in his footsteps. "Good morning, Captain Johnson," greeted Maria, a terminal supervisor with a friendly smile. "And who's this little gentleman?" "This is my son, Micah," Noah replied, placing a hand on Micah's shoulder. "He's tagging along today, flying to Miami." Maria knelt slightly to meet Micah's eye level. "Well, hello, Micah. Future captain in the making, huh?" Micah nodded shyly, his cheeks flushing with pride. The Sky High Cafe, nestled near the boarding gates, became their next stop. Noah ordered 2 steaming cups of hot chocolate and a blueberry muffin for Micah. Sitting by the large windows that overlooked the runway, they talked about flight mechanics and navigation. "Dad, do you ever get scared when you fly?" Micah asked, breaking a piece of his muffin. "Every pilot feels nervous sometimes," Noah admitted. "But courage isn't about never being scared, it's about doing what's right, even when you are." Micah absorbed his father's words, feeling a sense of awe at the responsibility his dad carried every day. An unforgettable gift. As their time together dwindled, Noah pulled something from his uniform pocket, a gleaming silver pin shaped like a pair of wings. He handed it to Micah with a solemn expression. "These are junior pilot wings," Noah explained. "I got my first pair when I was your age. They remind you that no matter how big your dreams are, they're worth chasing." Micah stared at the pin, his eyes misting with emotion. "Thanks, Dad. I'll make you proud." Noah knelt and pinned the wings onto Micah's jacket, adjusting them until they were perfectly straight. "You already do, son." Their goodbye was brief but heartfelt. Noah had to prepare for his flight, leaving Micah to check in as an unaccompanied minor. As he walked away, Noah glanced back, watching Micah with a mixture of pride and concern. A rocky encounter. Micah approached the check-in counter, where a middle-aged woman in a crisp uniform stood typing on her computer. Her name tag read, Claire Mitchell. "Excuse me, ma'am," Micah began politely, handing over his ticket. Claire glanced at him briefly, before returning to her screen. "One moment," she said curtly. Micah waited, shifting his weight nervously from foot to foot. After several long minutes, Claire finally picked up his ticket. Her brow furrowed as she examined it. "Unaccompanied minor?" she asked, her tone flat. "Yes, ma'am. My dad is." Claire cut him off, waving a hand dismissively. "Let me get your tags." Micah's attempt to explain that his father was Captain Johnson fell on deaf ears. Claire moved with brisk efficiency, her demeanor cold and impatient. She printed out a tag and handed it to him without making eye contact. "There," she said. "Attach this to your backpack. Someone will take you to the gate." Micah hesitated. "Ma'am, my dad is." "Look, kid," Claire interrupted, her tone sharp. "We don't have time for stories. Just wait by the gate like everyone else." Micah's cheeks burned with embarrassment. He clutched his backpack and stepped aside, his earlier excitement dampened by the interaction. Unspoken connections. As Micah sat near the gate, he spotted a woman in a pilot's uniform, greeting passengers with a warm smile. She introduced herself as Sarah Thompson, the co-pilot for the flight. Her cheerful demeanor stood in stark contrast to Claire's brusqueness. Micah watched her intently, wishing he could tell her about his father. But before he could work up the courage, Claire appeared again, her expression as stern as ever. "Come on, let's board," she said, motioning for Micah to follow. Micah followed her through the jet bridge, his heart pounding. He tried to focus on his father's words about courage, but the sting of Claire's dismissal lingered. As he settled into his seat near the back of the plane, Micah gazed out the window, clutching the junior pilot wings pinned to his jacket. The journey ahead felt uncertain, but he resolved to face it with the bravery his father had taught him. A rude awakening in the sky. The faint hum of the aircraft engines filled the cabin as Marcus sat quietly in his assigned seat at the back of the plane. His small frame was pressed against the sidewall, his chin resting on his hand as he stared out of the tiny, partially obstructed window. He had imagined this flight to be one of excitement and awe, a chance to experience what it was like to soar above the clouds, like his father always described. Instead, he felt out of place and defeated, the memory of the flight attendant's dismissive attitude weighing heavily on him. Marcus adjusted his junior pilot wings pinned to his jacket, straightening them with trembling hands. His father's voice echoed in his mind, reminding him to stay brave and keep his head high. He held on to that thought like a lifeline, despite the lump in his throat. He didn't understand why the flight attendant seemed so cold to him. It wasn't like he had done anything wrong. The aisle was busy as passengers continued to board, some struggling to stow their luggage, while others moved swiftly to their seats. A young woman, seated in the row across from Marcus, gave him a warm smile. She had noticed the commotion earlier and seemed sympathetic. "First time flying alone?" she asked softly, leaning over slightly. Marcus nodded. "Yes, ma'am." "Well, you're doing great," she replied kindly. "I bet your parents are really proud of you." A small smile flickered across Marcus's face, and he mumbled a quiet, "Thank you." Her kindness felt like a much-needed salve on his bruised spirit. A surprise passenger. As the plane began to taxi toward the runway, a commotion arose at the front of the cabin. Marcus craned his neck, but the line of seats blocked his view. Murmurs rippled through the passengers around him. "I think someone missed their seat," the young woman across the aisle whispered to herself. Suddenly, the same flight attendant who had brusquely moved Marcus earlier, came striding down the aisle. Her face was tight with frustration, and she appeared to be holding an object in her hand, a pair of sunglasses. Behind her followed a tall, sharply dressed man, his long strides exuding an air of authority. Marcus's heart skipped a beat when he recognized the familiar face, Dad," he whispered in disbelief. Captain Jordan Williams, in his full pilot's uniform, walked briskly toward the back of the plane, his gaze sweeping over the rows until it landed on Marcus. His stern expression softened immediately into a look of concern. Claire Mitchell, clearly flustered, spoke in hushed but urgent tones behind him. "Captain, I assure you, this is just a minor seat adjustment, airline policy and all," she stammered, clearly trying to save face. Jordan stopped directly in front of Marcus's row and crouched slightly to meet his son's eyes. "Marcus," he said gently, "are you okay?" Marcus nodded, though his wide eyes betrayed the emotional weight of the past hour. "I'm fine, Dad." "Are you sure?" Jordan pressed, his voice quieter now, as though aware of the curious stares surrounding them. I was just doing what she told me to," Marcus admitted, gesturing toward the cramped space around him. Jordan's jaw tightened ever so slightly as he stood to his full height and turned toward Claire. His calm demeanor barely masked the intensity of his disappointment. "Miss Mitchell," he began, his voice steady but firm, "could you explain to me why my son is seated back here when I personally ensured he had a seat with a proper view and adequate comfort?" Claire's eyes widened slightly as she realized who Marcus was. "Captain Williams, I didn't know he was your son," she stuttered. "I just thought that he was any less deserving of kindness or respect?" Jordan interrupted, his words striking like a hammer. His tone remained professional, but the weight behind them left no room for argument. "Miss Mitchell, my son is just as much a passenger as anyone else on this plane, and it is your duty to treat every individual with dignity, regardless of their age, race, or situation." By now, several passengers had turned their attention to the unfolding drama, their hushed whispers creating a low murmur through the cabin. I apologize, Captain," Claire said, visibly shaken. I'll make the proper adjustments." A shift in the atmosphere. Jordan knelt again, this time reaching for Marcus's backpack. "Come on, buddy. Let's get you back to your seat." Marcus hesitated, his eyes darting between his father and Claire. "But what if?" Jordan placed a reassuring hand on his son's shoulder. "It's okay. You belong up there." As Marcus stood and followed his father back up the aisle, he couldn't help but notice the shift in the cabin's energy. The same passengers who had ignored the earlier altercation now watched him with a mix of curiosity and admiration. When they reached his original seat in row 14, Marcus saw that the kind man who had helped him earlier, Mr. Lewis, was still seated nearby. "Glad to see you back where you belong, young man," Mr. Lewis said warmly, giving Marcus a small wink. Jordan smiled at the older gentleman before turning to Marcus. "You good now, co-pilot?" "Yes, sir," Marcus replied, his confidence beginning to return. He settled into his seat and clutched his model airplane tightly. For the first time that day, he felt like he belonged. In-flight reflection. The plane roared to life as it ascended into the clear blue sky. Marcus gazed out the window, mesmerized by the sight of the ground shrinking below. This was the part he had been waiting for, the magic of flight. The seatbelt sign turned off, and passengers began to relax, unbuckling their belts and pulling out books or headphones. A flight attendant, not Claire, approached Marcus with a kind smile. She knelt slightly to be at his eye level. "Hi, Marcus," she said gently. "I'm Sarah, one of the co-pilots today. Your dad told me you're a future aviator, is that right?" Marcus nodded shyly. "Yes, ma'am." "Well, you've got the best teacher in the skies," Sarah said. "And if you ever have questions about planes or flying, I'd be happy to answer them." She handed him a pair of small headphones. "We have a channel that talks about aviation, maybe you'd enjoy that during the flight." Marcus's face lit up. "Thank you." Sarah gave him a thumbs up before heading back to the cockpit, leaving Marcus feeling lighter than he had all morning. A redemption arc. As the flight continued, Claire Mitchell approached Marcus's row. She looked distinctly uncomfortable, her earlier confidence replaced with a more subdued demeanor. "Marcus," she began, her voice quieter now, "I wanted to say I'm sorry. I shouldn't have spoken to you the way I did or moved you without understanding the situation. Marcus looked up at her, unsure of what to say. He felt a mixture of emotions, relief, confusion, and a lingering sadness from how she had treated him earlier. But his father's words echoed in his mind, kindness isn't weakness. It's okay, Marcus said finally, his voice soft but sincere. I forgive you. Claire blinked, clearly taken aback by his grace. She nodded stiffly before retreating down the aisle, leaving Marcus to enjoy the rest of the flight in peace. As Marcus gazed out the window, watching the endless expanse of clouds roll by, he felt a renewed sense of pride in himself. His father's words had guided him through the turbulence of the day, and now, as the plane soared high above the world, so too did Marcus's spirit. The sky silent lessons. Hours into the flight, Marcus began to settle into the gentle rhythm of the journey. The hum of the engines, combined with the occasional turbulence, lulled the cabin into a sense of tranquility. Outside the window, endless clouds stretched like a soft, rippling ocean beneath a canopy of endless blue. For the first time, Marcus allowed himself to relax completely, his earlier anxieties fading into the horizon. He clutched the tiny model airplane his dad had given him before the flight, studying its intricate details. The toy had always been his favorite, a perfect replica of the type of aircraft his dad flew. As he traced his fingers over its wings, he wondered what it felt like to be in the cockpit, making decisions that affected so many lives. The thought both thrilled and intimidated him. A glimpse into the cockpit. A familiar voice interrupted his thoughts. Marcus, came Sarah's cheerful tone as she approached his seat again. This time, she held something behind her back. He looked up curiously. Yes, ma'am? She crouched beside him, her eyes sparkling with excitement. How would you like to see where your dad works? Marcus's eyes widened in disbelief. The cockpit? She grinned. The cockpit. Your dad said it's okay if you're up for it. Yes, yes, yes. Marcus exclaimed, nearly jumping out of his seat. He fumbled with his seatbelt, his eagerness getting the better of him. Sarah chuckled, helping him unbuckle. Hold on to your wings, junior pilot. Let's go. Walking through the narrow aisle toward the front of the plane, Marcus felt the curious gazes of passengers. Some smiled encouragingly, while others exchanged whispers. Marcus didn't care, his heart was racing with anticipation. Sarah led him past the galley and through the heavy cockpit door, which she opened with a secure swipe of her badge. The sight inside took his breath away. The cockpit was a labyrinth of buttons, switches, and glowing screens. Outside the large windows, the endless sky seemed even closer, its brilliant expanse stretching as far as the eye could see. Marcus's dad sat in the captain's seat, a headset over his ears and a calm but focused expression on his face. Beside him sat another pilot, an older man with silver hair and a kind smile. Jordan turned when he saw Marcus and broke into a grin. Hey there, co-pilot, he said, motioning for Marcus to come closer. Marcus hesitated, his awe rendering him speechless. Can I touch anything? He whispered. Jordan laughed. Not yet, buddy. But you can sit in the jump seat and watch. Come on. The heart of the aircraft. Sarah helped Marcus into the jump seat behind the pilots. From there, he had a perfect view of the intricate controls and the panoramic view of the world outside. The older pilot introduced himself as Captain Roger Grayson, the first officer for this flight. Nice to meet you, Marcus, Captain Grayson said warmly. Your dad's told us a lot about you. He has? Marcus asked, his face lighting up. Oh, yeah, Grayson replied, adjusting his controls. Says you're already a better pilot than he was at your age. Marcus beamed, the compliment making him feel 10 feet tall. For the next several minutes, Jordan and Grayson explained the various controls and displays, simplifying the technical terms so Marcus could follow along. They talked about the importance of teamwork, the responsibility of keeping passengers safe, and the sense of wonder they still felt every time they took to the skies. Do you see that little green light blinking on the panel? Jordan asked, pointing to a specific indicator. Marcus nodded. That's our autopilot system keeping us steady, Jordan explained. But even with all this technology, the most important tool in flying is right here. He tapped his temple. Your brain. Pilots need to think ahead, stay calm, and always be ready for the unexpected. Marcus nodded thoughtfully. He had never seen his dad like this before, so composed and authoritative, yet approachable. It made him admire his father even more. A special message. Before Marcus left the cockpit, Jordan handed him a headset. Want to make an announcement to the passengers? Marcus's jaw dropped. Really? Sure, Jordan said with a wink. You're the junior pilot, remember? Grayson leaned over. I'll set you up. Just speak clearly into the mic. Everyone will hear you. Marcus hesitated, his nerves threatening to take over. But as he glanced at his dad, he remembered the lessons he had learned that day, about bravery, kindness, and self-belief. He took a deep breath and nodded. Grayson pressed a button, and Marcus heard his voice echo slightly through the headset. Hello, everyone, he began, his voice trembling slightly. This is Marcus, the junior pilot. I just wanted to say thank you for flying with us today. My dad says being a pilot is the best job in the world, and I think he's right. I hope you all have a great flight. When he finished, there was a brief pause before a wave of applause rippled through the cabin. Marcus's cheeks burned, but his smile stretched ear to ear. A quiet moment of pride. Back in his seat, Marcus replayed the experience in his mind. The applause, the cockpit, his dad's encouraging smile, it all felt like a dream. The young woman across the aisle leaned over again. You were great, she said with a warm smile. Sounds like you've got a bright future ahead of you. Thank you, Marcus replied, his confidence growing with each passing moment. A lesson for all. As the plane began its descent, Marcus gazed out the window once more. The sprawling cityscape below grew larger with each passing second, a patchwork of buildings, roads, and rivers. He thought about everything that had happened, Claire's initial coldness, his father's quiet but firm intervention, the lessons learned in the cockpit. It occurred to him that flying wasn't just about controlling an aircraft, it was about navigating life with the same balance and composure. When the plane landed, the passengers applauded, a tradition Marcus had never understood until now. It wasn't just for the safe landing, it was a celebration of trust, teamwork, and the shared journey. As Marcus stepped off the plane, his dad waiting by his side, he felt ready for anything. The sky was no longer just a distant dream. It was a challenge, an adventure, and a reminder of the boundless possibilities waiting for him in life. The landing and the legacy. The plane began its gradual descent, the horizon shifting from endless blue skies to a patchwork quilt of city lights and distant landscapes. A soft ding signaled the final stretch of the journey. Passengers stirred, fastening their seatbelts, and the cabin buzzed with the muted hum of anticipation. Marcus pressed his forehead to the window, marveling at the glowing grid below. This is the best part, he whispered to Claire, his face alight with excitement. Claire leaned closer, her earlier tension now replaced with a quiet curiosity. You've seen this before? Marcus nodded. A few times. But it's always amazing, right? Like landing on another planet. She smirked. I guess it is, never thought of it that way. A father's touch. From the cockpit, the captain's voice crackled over the intercom. Ladies and gentlemen, this is Captain Evans. We're making our final approach to our destination. On behalf of the crew, thank you for flying with us today. We hope you've had a pleasant journey. Marcus straightened in his seat, his face beaming with pride. That's my dad. Claire glanced at him, surprised. He sounds different. Calm, steady. He says a good pilot has to sound like that no matter what's happening, Marcus explained. It helps everyone feel safe. Claire's expression softened. He's good at it. The plane began to dip lower, the lights on the ground growing brighter. Marcus could feel the subtle shifts as the plane adjusted its course. Though he was used to this moment, it never failed to send a thrill through him. A shared moment. As the plane glided closer to the ground, Marcus noticed Claire gripping the armrest again. Her earlier ease had faltered, replaced by a flicker of unease. Without thinking, he reached out and placed his hand gently on hers. "It's okay," he said quietly. "My dad's got this." Claire looked down at his small hand, then back at him. For a moment, she seemed unsure, but then she gave a small nod. "Thanks, Marcus." The landing gear engaged with a reassuring thud, and the plane descended smoothly. The faint hum of the engines filled the cabin as the runway approached. Marcus watched Claire out of the corner of his eye, noticing how she was taking slow, deliberate breaths. When the wheels touched down, the cabin filled with the sound of tires skimming asphalt, followed by the roar of reverse thrust. Applause erupted from a few passengers, and Claire let out a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. "That wasn't so bad," she admitted, glancing at Marcus. "I told you," he replied with a grin. "He's the best." Grounded in connection. As the plane taxied to the gate, Claire seemed different. Her earlier tension had melted away, replaced by a look of quiet contemplation. When the seatbelt sign clicked off, she didn't rush to stand like many others. Instead, she stayed seated, watching Marcus gather his things. "Marcus," she said, her tone softer than before. He turned to her. "Yeah?" "Thanks," she said simply. "For reminding me that flying isn't just about getting from one place to another. It's more than that." Marcus smiled. "My dad says it's about the journey, not just the destination." Claire chuckled. "Smart guy. Runs in the family, I guess." The older woman beside her leaned over. "You've got a good travel buddy here," she said to Claire. "He's been a real gentleman." Claire laughed. "Yeah, he has. Maybe I'll hire him as my co-pilot next time." Marcus grinned. "I'll be ready." Reunion and reflection. As the passengers began disembarking, Marcus and Claire joined the line. When they stepped into the terminal, a man in a crisp uniform was waiting near the gate. His presence commanded attention, not because of his stature, but because of the warmth in his eyes. "Dad!" Marcus shouted, dropping his bag and running into the man's arms. Captain Evans knelt to hug his son, his face breaking into a wide smile. "Hey, buddy. How was the flight?" "Amazing," Marcus said, his voice bursting with excitement. "I told everyone you were the best pilot ever." Claire watched the reunion from a few steps away, an unexpected lump forming in her throat. When Captain Evans looked up, their eyes met. "You must be Claire," he said, extending a hand. "Marcus told me about you." Claire shook his hand, taken aback by his easy demeanor. "He did?" "Only good things," Captain Evans assured her. "Thank you for keeping him company." Claire glanced at Marcus, who was now tugging on his father's sleeve. "Actually, I think it was the other way around. Your son's got a way of making people see things differently." Captain Evans smiled knowingly. "He gets that from his mom." A changed perspective. As they parted ways, Claire found herself lingering near the terminal windows. She watched as Captain Evans and Marcus walked together, their laughter filling the space between them. It was a simple moment, but it carried a weight she couldn't quite explain. For years, flying had been a means to an end for Claire, a necessary inconvenience in her hectic life. But now, as she stood there, she realized it could be something more. It wasn't just about planes or destinations, it was about the people you met along the way, the connections you forged, and the lessons you learned at 30,000 feet. Claire smiled to herself, her earlier frustrations forgotten. As she turned to leave, she felt lighter, as if a part of her had stayed behind in the clouds. For Marcus, it had been just another flight. But for Claire, it was the start of seeing the world, and herself, in a whole new way.